Thank you for having me. Good morning. My name is Werner Eriksen, and I'm happy to be here at the Kamailio World. Actually, my first experience with Kamailio was in 2002, 2003. Then I worked with a small company in Norway called Telio, and I think Alan Durick is coming in later today, which was my boss at that time. And this animal was quite difficult to work with in the beginning, but actually it created a quite big business in Norway. And a lot of the things I learned from the Kamailio experience with Telio, and Telio was this challenger to the incumbent in Norway on the fixed line business. And then we learned that open source, heavy software engineering capacities can make a big difference. And this is what we try to apply in a different setting. So what I'll present for you today is basically our setup in Telenor, which is a small setup compared to the rest of the group, and kind of a recipe on how other telcos can actually start innovating on the mobile core within a big organization. Okay? So first, I have to present our sponsor, which is Telenor Group. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but actually it's a tiny country. So Norway is 5 million people. Telenor was the old incumbent in Norway and have been able to expand beyond the Norwegian border. So 40 times more customers now than actually people in Norway. So it's present in 13 different countries. So it's a significant operation. 160 years of history. And actually at one point, Telenor was one of the major employers of engineers in Norway. That was an interesting time in the 70s. Now it's almost opposite. They don't have any engineers because most of it is outsourced, because that has been the game of many of the mobile operators for the last 15 years. So we're trying to change that a bit. But this is Telenor Group, and we're part of Telenor Group, but we are trying to challenge a little bit the way we work, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So basically, we've been trying to set up a telco, but it's initially purely for experimental use. So we want to try to open a lot of the black boxes in the system and see if we can do something about them to make some interesting services. And therefore, software is, of course, a very key part of that. And this is also affecting the team build-up. Everything is virtualized these days. That's a word you need to have to come to these conferences. We actually try to use cloud-based infrastructure to simplify the everyday life of the developers and engineers. And there's a lot of effort now going on to private clouds. And private clouds is important in many regards for telcos due to regulation. In many of the markets we're in, you're not allowed to export any data about the users beyond the borders of the country. So that means restrictions on use of public clouds. But we try to combine the two to get the best of the two worlds. And this is basically what I'm going to go through, how we did it and maybe how you can do it too, all right? Basically, we started out saying that, okay, we would like to create some interesting stuff. And you may recognize this guy, Swedish chef from the Muppet Show. Very creative guy. Swedish, actually I read in Wikipedia that the Swedes don't like to call him, they think he sounds much more like a Norwegian. So we can accept that. But anyways, it is true. Okay, thank you. Are you from Sweden then? Yeah. Anyways, he has a lot of good ideas, all right, to create new dishes. Sometimes little but controversial, maybe the method he is using. And of course, when we started out, we went to one of the existing operations, like Telenor in Norway, which has a big running business. And of course, they would love to have successful services to deploy. But what they see when we talk about this great chef is this guy in their running network. And of course, that is a big no-go. And you can understand why when an hour of downtime makes headline news for a couple of days. So this guy needs to find some other place to go. And as I said, love to have your services, but don't try them out in my home network. And basically, we spent some time trying to figure out what we could do there, because we really need to be able to touch these sacred boxes if we want to do something interesting. So our approach has been this. There is something called a mobile virtual network operator, and there are different interpretations of that. But our interpretation, and what our setup is basically that we rent the radio network, and only the radio network. Everything else we have set up on our own. So we have our own HLRs, SMSCs, packet gateways, and so on, to be able to experiment. And by doing so, we don't risk bringing down this network. There is a slight possibility of doing so, but it's much, much smaller, because you have very clear interfaces, and they can shut us down if we act up. All right? So this is the fundamental part of being able to, in a sandbox environment, be able to try out new services. Yeah, this is basically definitions of MVNOs. A lot of them have been out here, so there's probably lots of MVNOs types in Germany too. A lot of them are focusing on this side, the marketing and sales, and they don't have any infrastructure themselves. Some have customer care, of course, or billing. And this is an area where telcos traditionally have been extremely good at innovation, figuring out very interesting and intriguing ways of charging you for the different services. That has been a masterpiece, I would say, from the operators. But our focus has been here on the core network side and the value-added services. So in our setup, we don't really have these traditional parts, okay? Because we want to look at, real services in the core network. So part of the recipe, we started out building the team very differently from the traditional setup. Most of the team members are software engineers. And most of the team members knew nothing about the protocols we use in the core network when we started out. But they had skills in the virtualized environments, so the public clouds, the private clouds. They had good programming skills, and they were eager to learn. So that was like the major part of being able to set this up. Okay? And there's a reason why we didn't bring a lot of telco engineers in here. This is actually a picture from the first, or from the day when we had the first call going through our system. And actually we have some guys from some of the vendors we use as well, bringing champagne to support the celebration. The other thing is, and how many people are working in telco here today? Can you just have a quick? Okay. Then most of you are from kind of untraditional telcos maybe, but from a traditional telco, these tools you don't really know about, okay? These vendors you don't really care about. I try not to use the new logo of Kamailio. Is this the right one, Daniel? No. Oh shit, okay. I need to update it then again. But anyways, these are the tools that this team is using every day, okay? And it's not very different from a lot of other software-heavy projects, okay? But it's extremely different from the traditional tools that's used by our sister companies in the group. So when we show them this, they will probably be able to recognize one or two. I guess most of you know these tools by heart, and I think that's necessary if you want to do some of the things we do. So we have software engineers, we have the tools that all internet-related companies are able to use. Then we didn't want to bring this into just a lab environment. So a very key part of the ingredient is that we wanted to be able to expose the service to real live users that we don't know the first name of. And only by doing that, we are able to falsify or validate the hypothesis we build, all right? Is this a real service that has merit? And even though the team likes it, doesn't mean that it will fly in the real world. So this was a key part of it, and this is a little bit more complicated because then you need to kind of be registered as an operator. So we are an operator in Norway. We can hand out SIM cards to real users. We need to adhere to the regulation. That's the price you pay to get access to those who matters, and that's your user base. And our first trial was with actual students, Norwegian students, going abroad for a semester or two. We offer them the ability to keep the phone numbers, keep texting, keep sending messages to family and friends and banks and so on at home. But they didn't get a SIM card. So what they got access to was basically, we ported the numbers, we managed to get them going basically using WebRTC. And the only thing they need is access to a PC with WebRTC support. So in this way, we could iterate and see what pain points and what we solved and what we did not solve. Of course, these kids, they are very much at home with the messengers of the world, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and so on. But they will that will take them only so far. You know, most of the banks don't support you on WhatsApp today. That might change. But eventually, you need to be able to reach out to people that are not on these firewall or walled garden platforms like WhatsApp is. So this is the interface of that service from a user's perspective. No installs, you just go to a URL called phoneline.no. And I would say it has been a quite good success. You see these students spread across the world. This was, of course, interesting when our small team were to do support. Time zones all over the place. But most of the traffic is going home to Norway. And that means it's the same time zone that we are based out of. So it didn't turn out to be that much of a problem anyways. But this is basically a live view of where the students reside at the moment. Then, our setup, what does it look like? We did some tricks to make life easier for the developers. One of those tricks was to bring everything on IP. So a lot of these protocols, SS7 is not based on IP, as you know. So we spent a lot of effort trying to get help to do the translation from SS7 to Sigtran, for instance. Because by doing so, the developers, which don't know SS7, they do know how to use Wireshark. And they are intelligent guys, so they will figure out how these messages look like and, you know, demystify a lot of the difficulties with these protocols. So everything is brought onto IP. We can run in private and public cloud settings, depending on. And these control nodes, I'm not sure if you are familiar with all the names, but basically the HSS and the HLR is a glorified database. That's where the user credentials, the user profile reside. And at the bottom, it's a database. From the HSS, this came in with 4G. It's based on diameter, which is based on, it's an IP protocol. The HLR is on SS7, but we bring it on to SS7 or to Sigtran. SMSC for messaging, USSD, I'm not sure if that's popular here, it's not popular in Norway, but in many of our markets, this is actually a way to interact with the phones that are not smartphones. And they're used for topping up, checking balance and so on in many of the markets which are in developing communities. These green boxes, we have sourced them. And sourcing is what telcos have been doing quite well recently. Okay? So heavy standardization has enabled a great ecosystem of vendors like the Ericssons, the Huawei's, and then eventually like Kamailio. You know, the standards are there, you can implement them, and even now IMS is there. And then you have, of course, due to the new structure or the structure of the telcos where a lot of the technical know-how has been outsourced as much as possible. Then you want to rely on big vendors that can take care of you if something goes wrong. We have been looking at different kinds of vendors. So ideally, we will find people like Kamailio, open source, supported by a community. And most time, we have actually started to find those. And in other places, we are not able to find them yet. But these are very different from the typical vendor Telenor group. What we have found, though, is that having a very strong development team on our own is very easy for us to resolve issues that normally would take a lot of time. Okay? So if there's a problem, it's very easy for us to relate to the problem and also help them help us if we are stuck. Finally, What we need is, of course, some secret sauce, because anyways, this could be set up by anyone. You don't need software engineers to integrate this. So we picked a few nodes based on some of the competence in the team. The gateway MSC and the MSC is basically for handling the voice traffic. We built that on our own, and we have a sister team which is working heavily with our WebRTC. I have the logo here. They're called appear.in. That's basically a link-based video conferencing system. So you don't need to have an account. You log in, or you get a URL, you share it, and then you're in a conference. So we have competence in this area, and this is where we actually started out doing innovation, we think. Okay, so this is what enabled the service that we offer to the students. And also we replaced a quite hefty component, the MSCs. And this is quite heavy lifting if you want to do it properly. But by using the tools, the methodologies, and what's available out there now, this is actually possible with a fairly small team. So our team is still about 12 guys. Most of them are software engineers. And they have been able to, within reasonable time, get the challenge, start looking for partners to work with, getting the licenses, getting the setup where to run, and enabling the first calls within 6 months. And that is fairly short time. And I think this shows that having this alternative way of setting it up is more feasible than ever. Okay. So our recipe has been a desire. Okay, so if you look at the innovation on SMS, it hasn't been radical since 1992, or when it was launched. And while waiting for IMS and Volte, so before joining Telio, which was a small startup in Norway, I spent more than 10 years in a larger company called Ericsson. And a lot of that time I spent building IMS, the platform. And the final years I actually worked on behalf of Ericsson in 3GPP on standardization. And then I gave up. I met Alan again. He talked about the Kamailio thing, small, easy, it will work. And that's what we did. And of course, in 2002, we believe that IMS will take off in 2003. And it didn't exactly do that, but now it's finally here. And Telenor in Norway has actually started launching Volte for real to the whole user base, but that's like many, many years since we hoped it will actually take off. So standardization, I think you had a question about that, and 5G and so on. This is very tricky, I think, for the whole industry, because it brings many good things, but it can be quite slow. And if you need a lot of people, if this whole room is to agree on one thing, it will take a lot of discussion, and there will be different motivations for doing so sometimes. And then rolling it out, agreeing, and making sure that it works end to end, that is a big challenge. And when you see the companies like WhatsApp, 50 engineers running more than all of the messaging from the operators together, there is something going on here. Anyways, we still think that there's room for innovation in the mobile core. I think we have started to prove that a little bit. I think also on the packet core side, we can do stuff. Then you add software engineers, talked about that. You still need someone that understands a little bit what's going on these interfaces though, all right? So we tried to bring as few as possible, but as many as required into this. And of course, in the beginning, this person was totally overwhelmed, couldn't understand what the heck we're trying to do. This is impossible was basically the mantra for the first couple of months. No, you cannot do that. It's illegal from a telco perspective. You shouldn't do it. You couldn't do it. Oh, wow, it works. So it has changed quite a bit over the years. But you do need some of this competence, right? Otherwise, you will spend a lot of time trying to understand the S1, 2, 3, whatever interface they're called, and demystify it a bit. Then standards have been important for us because we can connect basically to any radio network using standard MVNO interfaces. So in theory, we could connect to anyone that has basic setup today, which is supporting the standard MVNO interfaces. And almost all operators today, they support this if they want. Then you want to work with a different kind of vendor that has ideally an open source agenda. And for some of the projects, we've been able to contribute a little bit back. But problem solving and the innovation part is so much easier if you know what's going on, and you can actually talk directly to those building it and have the short cycles when you want to change stuff. And as I said, which is not new to you, I guess, is you need to be able to take advantage of the same tools as the internet companies are doing today to get the velocity. And without that, it would not be possible to do this, because it's quite heavy lifting we're talking about. And this is something I want to stress. A major part of our ability to do the right things is to have access to real users. Doing this in a lab setup is fine, but it's only taking you, I think, 1/3 on the way there. Because you really need to interact with the users to get an understanding of which problems they have and what you want to solve. And to make it interesting, you add a bit of secret sauce, let it stir, and we have high temperature in the team, and hopefully we'll be able to innovate and create some new services that are standing out from the rest. And with that, we have our kitchen, we have our chef, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave me a note, and I'll respond to you if I'm able to respond. Okay?
Hey, so questions? You know, it's possible? Yeah. Alex.
Hi, as a US-based person, I'd be curious to know if you know offhand whether the terms for MVNOs operating in Norway and perhaps elsewhere in the EU differ significantly from how we've come to view MVNOs specifically. Are they considered a kind of first-class service provider? Are they able to own numbering resources? To what extent are they obligated to market handsets and purchase inventory? To what extent are SIP interconnects available, and so on?
The honest answer is no. I don't exactly know what the situation is in the US with regards to these MVNOs, but I think the classification holds. And I guess the regulation is not too different in terms of once you start handling sensitive data about the customers and so on, you start to also become an operator, and then you need to actually register as an operator. By doing so, you also get access to some of the resources like phone numbers and so on. I would believe that, I think that's the same case in the US, but I don't know. Okay, you say no, you know the answer there. But I think regulation is actually supposed to work that way, that if anyone that wants to be an operator adhere to the rules of the regulator, you will be able to get access to some of these resources. Now, there's some of that more scarce than others, like Spectrum, all right? That's a different kind of thing. They have seen that they can make some money out of that, so they will auction it. But you're free to join the auction, I guess. But of course, that takes some pocket money. And what we have done is basically then say, let's not do that. We will focus basically on the core network. We can actually do things, all right? But by adhering to the regulation, we are able to get access to the phone numbers. We can get access to the number portability databases, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, we need to give something back, and that's compliance to certain rules.
Okay. Then let's go for the coffee break, and then we'll catch up with the next, as we are a bit on delay. Thank you, Leonard. Thank you again.